Yelling at patients.
God loves you! Hi, Facebook followers! These people want to kill your babies.
Abortion isn't something that's new, and folks have been managing their pregnancies way beyond our time. From the 1600s to the 1800s, abortion was completely legal in the United States. According to Planned Parenthood, abortion is now legal thanks to Roe v. Wade, but restrictions vary by state. According to Our Bodies, Ourselves, the attacks on abortion access were rooted in racism and white supremacy. White doctors often targeted black midwives for particular condemnation. People seeking to criminalize abortion were also motivated by increased immigration, specifically of Catholic immigrants, and declining birth rate among U.S.-born white Protestant women in the late 1800s. Though abortions were once managed and supported by women, today we see obstetricians and clinics. Not every state has accessible care. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back. This video is another video that some might not be comfortable with and may not agree with. Keep the comments as respectful as you can. It's okay to disagree on things, but I don't want hurtful comments here, especially for the people who need support. In this video, I sit down with Lauren. Lauren is a clinic escort as well as a doula. She supports those having abortions to miscarriages. You're an abortion doula, and I wanted to know why you became one.
I experienced a teen pregnancy at 16, and I suffered a miscarriage at 12 weeks, and that was extremely traumatic to go through as a child. At 19, I was splitting and getting out of an abusive relationship when I found out I had an ectopic pregnancy that had to be terminated, obviously, because it wasn't viable, and it would have done me immense harm if I had tried to continue to carry the pregnancy. And about 6 months later, I conceived my son from that same ovary. It was a really funny situation. When I went in for my first ultrasound, the tech offhandedly said, "Oh, your right ovary must be very active because I can see where it released the egg that your son came from." And I was like, wow, because that's the same side the ectopic pregnancy was on. And it was that experience of knowing that abortion not only saved my life, but it made it possible for my son to be here, for the child that I was meant to have, for the person who really brought everything in perspective for me to be here. That was only possible because of abortion care. For me, being an abortion doula is like saying thank you to the universe for allowing me to be able to access the healthcare that I needed. Because it's not easy for a lot of people. For me, it was really simple, right? My OBGYN gave me a diagnosis and sent me to a hospital. Most folks can't tell their OBGYN or don't feel comfortable telling their OBGYN, and they have to drive hours to a clinic, see a doctor they've never seen before that they don't know, and just all these barriers are thrust in front of them for necessary and just such consequential health care. It's so needed.
I'm so sorry for your losses, and thank you for sharing your experience. So what an abortion doula is.
Helping them with things like pain management, as far as getting heating pads and maybe doing some pressure point or some massage just to find off of the cramping. Help people find financial assistance, either pay for it out of pocket or they have to go to different people to try to get some money to help pay for their procedure. And then I also do options counseling. If someone comes to me and they're really unsure of what they want to do, them sort through what their feelings are so that they can make whatever decision is best for them. Really just sitting back and listening. So I'm not going to advise people like, oh, I think you should do this, or I think you should do that. It's more about just listening to people and saying, I hear you, that situation sounds really tough. Maybe asking them questions that are going to help them think about what they're feeling. Like if someone says, I don't have a good relationship with the person I conceived this pregnancy with, I could say, oh, well, can you picture what a parenting relationship, what a co-parenting relationship with that person would look like and how that could potentially fit into your life? Is that something that you feel comfortable with. And, questions like that really help people sort through hard, messy feelings and say, okay, I know I have now, sat down and looked at this, and I know this decision is what's best for me.
What is it with OBs? How come you can't just make an appointment with an obstetrician? I've read that they can only do so many abortions a year. Is that true?
It's a mix of like state laws. So like in California, OBGYNs can perform abortions in their office with very little restriction. Here in North Carolina, though, OBGYNs cannot perform what lawmakers call elective abortions. I don't consider any abortion elective. I think if somebody says, I need this for my health, be that mental, physical, whatever, it's necessary. But so OBGYNs are not allowed to perform elective abortions in the state of North Carolina. They can only perform DNCs and or prescribe abortion medication when fetal growth or a fetal heartbeat has stopped. There are only 9 abortion providers in the entire state of North Carolina, heavily concentrated in metropolitan areas. So what this means is that a lot of people in western and eastern North Carolina have little to no access and have to drive halfway across the state just to access care.
What does a regular day during this pandemic look like, I guess, as a doula or maybe clinic escort?
Things as a clinic escort right now, and if anybody doesn't know what a clinic escort is, outside of abortion clinics, there are often anti-choice extremists who seek to harass people seeking care.
Do you have hiccups sometimes? So does your baby. Your baby can yawn. We yawn all the time.
They will either lie to them and try to deceive them with fake clinics, which are religious organizations that try to manipulate people out of choosing access abortion care. And then there are often street preachers. They will scream like really hateful things at people and just be like, you're a murderer, don't do this, you're a coward. Clinic escorts are there to, number one, let patients know that these people that are screaming at them are protesters, they're not with the clinic, and show patients where they can park safely and help them get inside with as little harassment as possible. In the early days of COVID, that looked like us not going out at all. We had to shut down because of the stay-at-home orders. And unfortunately, anti-choice protesters stopped coming. In fact, in our city, 4 of them were arrested and charged and eventually sued our city, and have since made millions of dollars off of their social media campaigns for justice, and have expanded their operation all across the country because they got attention for defying lockdown. For a few months, we weren't able to go out. And then when we were able to come back out, it looked like having patients waiting outside, which was really difficult because, of course, that egged on the anti-choice protesters, having to juggle numbering cars to figure out which patient needs to go inside when. And that was so confusing for a while. That is dangerous and difficult. The people that we saw on Wednesday vandalizing the Capitol, those are the people who are outside of clinics. It's not a joke. I've had to report at least 15 people that I know from this state who were in the Capitol on Wednesday participating in domestic terrorism. It's so hard to express to people without seeming alarmist. I just find that so many folks think that anti-choice protesters that see outside of clinics are grandmas with like hard candy, and they just want you to, they just want to save babies. And that's never what they've been. They've been committing acts of domestic terrorism since abortion was legalized. Less than a decade ago, Dr. George Tiller was murdered in his church. This is an epidemic and it's a problem. And I think clinic escorts across the country are very, very on edge right now because we know that these extremists have been amped up. They have been incited led on, and they tried to go to the Capitol on Wednesday and have a victory, and they didn't get that. So what's their attitude going to be when they return? What kind of violence are they going to be willing to commit next?
And you can call it like it is, which they are terrorists. They're not just protesters or anti-choice grandmas, like you said. These are actual terrorists. And that fear is valid, and I would be really afraid too.
This is where I always like to plug getting involved with your local government, because my city had a stronger city council who was more passionate about reproductive freedom. We would have ordinances that prohibited the amplified sound devices that they used to scream at people. There are ways that the city can make it more peaceful for patients and protect patients without infringing on people's First Amendment rights. It's just a matter of people caring enough to make the elected officials care. Because what I see a lot is we have big events like when Georgia passed their 6-week ban, there was a huge influx of people who wanted to get into this work and start advocating. And we had local newspapers like covering what was going on for the first time and stuff like that. But it became a fad, and like people moved on from it. And at that point, we lose our leverage. Anti-choicers from approaching their cars and things like that. What we need is for people to care about your communities, care about the people in your county or your city or just wherever the nearest abortion provider is. Like, care about them enough to advocate for, noise buffer zones and laws that prohibit.
Maybe if you could explain different providers within a clinic.
This also varies a bit from state to state, depending on what your state's laws are. Here in North Carolina, the only people who can provide abortion care are OBGYNs. So in other states, you might find someone like a nurse midwife or a licensed nurse practitioner able to perform this procedure or prescribe this medication. But in the state of North Carolina and in most other southern states, only OBGYNs are allowed to provide this medication. Not even your family physician can perform this procedure. And nurses within the clinic, you'll have some RNs, maybe a CNA, and probably a couple of LPNs. And then there will be one OBGYN typically who is the provider of the care. In other states, you might be able to see a nurse practitioner at the clinic or a midwife, or even just go to your family physician.
What about abortion counselors? Would that vary in different states as well?
I think it's pretty safe to say that every abortion clinic requires some kind of counseling prior to making your decision. In most states, it's actually a state mandated script that they have to read. And sometimes the nurses will read that to you, and then sometimes they have a separate counselor who will sit down and will read the state mandated information with you, but also check in with you and just be like, hey, I know this is what the state told me to say, but now I want to sit down with you about how you're feeling.
And I was afraid of sitting through that too. I thought like it would definitely make me run out of the building, but I think the clinics are ran by people who they just care. So they're not going to try to deter you from your appointment.
And I think, the rhetoric I hear from anti-choice protesters a lot is that people at these clinics are invested in you having an abortion, right? When you come in there, they're like, yep, we're getting you on this table. And that's not how that works at all. Those workers are paid hourly. They get paid regardless of whether or not you decide to have a procedure. The doctor is also paid hourly. They don't care whether or not you decide to get that procedure. What they care about is ensuring that you have health care and ensuring that you're safe and that your autonomy is being respected. The clinics go to great lengths to let people know that if you are here and you don't want to be here, all you have to do is tell us, and we will make arrangements so you can leave.
Yeah, and I think I even remember that on maybe even the form that I filled out. It was something like that. And the nurse ahead of time, I don't know how I got her cell phone number, but she was like texting me before my appointment to make sure I was okay and that this is what I wanted because it was hard for me. But even after, she called and checked in on me and made sure that I was okay. And it wasn't like she was like, you have to get an abortion. It was more like, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so important to just counter that anti-choice rhetoric and the picture they try to paint of abortion clinics as this like uncaring, uncompassionate place that like treats pregnant people with uteruses like they're at some kind of slaughterhouse, like it's the conveyor belt of just in and out. And that's just not at all what I've experienced, and that's not the experiences I've heard from very many people.
No, this was some of the best reproductive health care I've ever gotten. Like, aside from going to a birth center or something, or meeting with my home birth midwife, this was like right up there with that. Like, these people cared. And
That's so wonderful to hear.
yeah, my nurse, she told me that she had to work, obviously, but she wanted to stay by my side the whole time. And she
Oh,
like held my hands and rubbed me and just let me cry if I needed to. And she was a really good nurse. So the people there, they do care. What might an appointment at a North Carolina clinic look like?
so it depends on what clinic you go to. So there are 2 appointments technically required in North Carolina, can be done via telehealth. Go over some things with and have you virtually sign some paperwork and email it back to them. My clinic from 8 a.m. to 9:30 is check-in time, and then every patient who's going to arrive that day is there by 9:30. And so once you get there, you go and you get checked in. You're going to get there hours before the doctor actually does. And the nurses are going to do all of your blood work and your workups. And they're going to do the state mandated ultrasound and do that state mandated counseling. And so going through that process along with other patients, it typically takes a few hours for them to get through everyone. And then usually right around the time they're finishing up doing everyone's intake and getting everyone's blood work and paperwork in order, the doctor will arrive. Once the doctor gets there, he takes some time to meet with the patients. And then they each come in one by one and he writes them the prescription and watches them take the first pill required by law in North Carolina. And they go out with a nurse and go over the rest of their discharge information, and they get to head out. And so usually people who are having a medication abortion will leave the clinic around 11:30 or 12 after being there for 3 or 4 hours. And folks who have to stay for a surgical procedure typically have to be there until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
But that leads me to ask, like, what kind of clinics are there? Like independent clinic we talked about and like Planned Parenthood. What are the difference between these places?
Really, really large organization that has a lot of name recognition. Um, and because of that, they have a lot of resources. They have an entire political advocacy group. They have, millions, if not billions of dollars in fundraising that they get every year. Whereas independent clinics are mom and pop abortion providers, I guess is the best way to explain it, right? These are just people who these communities saw a need for health care, and now they own 1 or 2 abortion clinics. And so they don't have the same infrastructure of support that Planned Parenthood does. So they're far more likely to face financial struggles and to also be unable to meet the requirements that are continually placed on them by the states to keep their licenses. So the important thing to know about independent clinics is they provide more than half of abortion care, and they are going out of business at hugely alarming rates all across the country, and they need your support.
And that seems really unfair because, like, I don't know, there's nothing wrong with Planned Parenthood, but it feels as if these bigger places just get things kind of handed to them as opposed to someone who really cares about their community and opens these clinics.
Yeah, these places definitely care a lot. And like you said, it's not that there's anything wrong with Planned Parenthood, are crucial, vital parts of our communities. They're owned by community members, they're run by community members. They're often staffed by community members. And it's that feeling of going somewhere where you feel like you can trust someone, you know them in a way that's meaningful. And that's so important to have, especially with the climate right now around accessing abortion care. It means so much to go somewhere where you feel safe.
Would a place like an independent clinic offer other things, not just abortion, like Planned Parenthood, like mammograms and maybe other reproductive health?
It also depends on the state. For certain funding, you have to have, some people require that you can't perform abortions in the same building that you provide cancer screenings, just ridiculous things. So sometimes yes and sometimes no. Like the independent clinic I escort with, they can provide birth control and some STD screening and things like that. But most of what they do, they couple with their abortion care, because the state of North Carolina doesn't let you do things like pap smears, cancer screenings at standalone abortion facilities without another special kind of licensing. It's a whole mess.
And that's another thing that seems really unfair, because Planned Parenthood, you can go there for like a number of things, can't you?
The thing is that Planned Parenthood has the resources to jump through
Yeah.
these hoops to comply with the outrageous requirements of the state. So you can go to Planned Parenthoods in North Carolina and birth control or cancer screening in the same building that they do abortions in, maybe not on the same day, but at least on the same building.
That leads me to my last question. What changes do you believe need to be made for more accessible reproductive health care? And what does accessible reproductive health care mean to you?
Oh, this is such a big question, because there's just so much that needs to happen. I'm personally of the opinion that the system that we have right now doesn't work, and there are lots of things that we have to do to fix that. One of the biggest things I have to say is we have to abolish the Hyde Amendment, which we actually have a chance of doing that now that more pro-choice friendly legislators actually have control of both the House and the Senate. But the Hyde Amendment is the spending bill that pretty much states that no federal funding, Medicaid money, can go to abortion care. And that's what keeps poor people from being able to access health care. If we have equal access, we have to acknowledge that just because someone's poor doesn't mean they don't have a right to get an abortion. Another really, really huge component here is what we've had to talk about a lot is how people can't just go to their OBGYN. And that's a travesty. There are so many qualified healthcare providers. There are family physicians. There are midwives. There are LPNs or LMPs that are totally capable of providing this healthcare, at the very least capable of writing the prescriptions for a medication abortion. And we have completely stopped them from being able to do that. And I think a huge portion of our problem with anti-choice extremists attacking people would go away if we would just let people go to their regular OBGYN's office, because then anti-choice extremists would have no idea who's there for a pap smear and who's there to terminate a pregnancy.
Yeah, and it's all a part of the barriers that are within the system right now. Like they have these clinics where anti-choice people know where they are and they go there and terrorize people. And then, you can't use your Medicaid in North Carolina to have an abortion, so that's another barrier. And then we've got like counseling and all these other things that they try to put in place that seem to hinder or try to hinder or keep someone from having an abortion. So it's like they set us up to fail. They're like, you can have an abortion, but there's a but. And it just makes it hard to have one for some people.
What I see so often is that people are like, we want to protect pregnant people. We don't want them to be getting haphazard health care. And just this like very disingenuous front of like trying to help people. And it personally offends me because I see firsthand that when you empower people and you give them choices and you respect their autonomy and you treat them like the adult that they are who is in charge of their own bodies, that helps them. It genuinely does, regardless of what the outcome is, and regardless of what they choose, right? I have had people who continue pregnancies who feel just as secure in their decision after speaking with me as someone who maybe decided to terminate their pregnancy, right? Like, this isn't about the outcome, it's about the person.
Yeah. And I think that's the most important thing, and that's what anti-choicers especially don't even have in mind. It's their own agenda. They don't care about the person.
Absolutely. And that's the most hypocritical part, is because they're constantly saying, we care. We care. They don't care. Meanwhile, you can walk into an abortion clinic, and if you say, hey, guess what? I'm pregnant and I am going to keep it, everybody is going to clap for you and be like,
Yeah.
yay, you're great. But, meanwhile, if you walk into the pregnancy crisis center and say, yeah, I think I'm going to have an abortion, number one, they might hold you hostage because they've done that before. And they're going to make you watch a bunch of really terrible videos and be like, no, don't do this. No, it's terrible. And it just shows that, like, one side has an agenda and one side is just trying to provide healthcare. These people often pretend that like material wants and needs will fulfill a person's desires, like within their soul. And I personally work very hard to help people who tell me, I would keep this pregnancy. I want to keep this pregnancy. It's just that X, Y, and Z are in my way. If you tell me you don't want to have an abortion, but you're scared you're not going to eat, or you're going to be homeless, I'm going to try to help you find resources. And if you tell me those resources aren't enough and you still need to terminate this pregnancy, then I'll support you. But what we're not going to do is I'm not going to pretend that sending you home with supplies and diapers is going to inflicting as little trauma on the parties involved as possible should always be the goal. And there's never any good outcome for somebody when you force them to endure a reproductive experience they don't want to endure. Be that forcing someone to have an abortion or forcing someone to carry a pregnancy to term. Both of those are terrible, horrible events. To intentionally introduce more trauma into those situations by taking away the autonomy of people who are pregnant is just unimaginable.
I don't think a lot of people see it that way when they fight for, anti-choice. I don't know if they understand what they're agreeing to. I'm not I'm not sure.
Very big disconnect for them between the idea of pregnancy is just something that happens to you, not something that you go through, right? Like, I think a lot of people, even those of them that have had children, they very much view it as an experience that's like being an incubator.
And that's something that I felt a lot lately, is how unfair it is to have a uterus, period. Like, it's just unfair that we have to go through things.
Yeah.
And we have to go through so many changes within our bodies, like in general, without having children. And it's painful and it sucks, and I'm angry, and it's just unfair to live in this body sometimes. And then for people, even though they might have a uterus too, for them to say, hey, like, I think that this is what you should do. It just makes me even more angry. Thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing your experience. I know that was hard. And thank you for all that you do for all birthing people and all birthing bodies. It's really important that we learn more about this and talk more about this. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you'd like, and I'll see you next time.